I'll tell you a little bit about the research that we do in my group. It is called Laboratory of Robotics and Learning. It's a little bit redundant because GRASP has all the words that here anyway. So the focus of what we do is understanding why learning is effective. Now, in this day and age, we know that learning is effective. You have built many things on your phone. Essentially, there is very few things that are not doing deep learning right now, whether it is the keyboard that you use or the camera that you click pictures with. Everything is doing some kind of learning in some shape or form. And roughly speaking, over the last 10 years or so, we've become very good at building these systems. What we are not so good at yet is understanding why this stuff works, which is a little bit of an embarrassment because we are really very good at building this. And you want to understand these things a little better because if they break, you would like to know how to fix them. So understanding by itself is not that useful, but it is useful to fix things when things break. And this is really why there is some merit to spending your time and energy in understanding something. So this work really began as a way of during my PhD, which was roughly like mid 2010s, trying to understand how complicated the loss function of a neural network is. A neural network, for those of you who are new to this, is a machine learning algorithm, is a modern machine learning algorithm that has many parameters. So millions and millions of parameters, many millions of images that these networks are typically trained on. And in some sense, this is a very hard problem to solve. Hard in the sense that the network is very large. The function that you're trying to minimize is very complicated. So it should be horrendously difficult to minimize these functions. Just to give you a small anecdote, I had a friend who did his PhD in MIT in chemical engineering. And his thesis was minimizing a non-convex function in 5 dimensions. In deep learning, we do this in basically 500 million dimensions. So clearly, if he got a thesis for doing it in 5 dimensions, and you and I can do something on our laptop in many million dimensions, something has to be easy about the problem that we are solving. So my PhD thesis was about finding or characterizing how easy or hard training a neural network is. And the basic summary, the one-sentence summary of my thesis is that these functions look very big, but they are not really that big. If you think about it, the shape of the function looks a little bit like the basin of the Colorado River. So this is a non-convex set. For those of you who know what non-convex sets are, they are not nice parabolas, but it winds around in the bottom, right? But you can also appreciate that it's not very difficult to go to the bottom of the river. All you have to do is stand at the top and then slide down, and you're at the bottom. The bottom is also the same bottom. It doesn't matter which part of the river you fall in. So this is roughly some pictorial understanding of the loss function of neural networks that we found. Once you understand things like this, you can also cook up newer ways to train neural networks, make stuff faster, etc., etc. So that is one way you can leverage this understanding. These days, what we do is think a little bit more about not just the ease of training, but why the network works well on new data. When you were in high school, some of you may be smarter, so maybe middle school, someone told you that if you have 10 points, you should not fit a polynomial with 100 degrees because you would overfit to these 10 points. This is very basic statistics, right? In deep learning, we love to do this. So we take, let's say, 50,000 images, and then we fit a model with 100 million weights. And it seems a little silly to do this. But it is somehow very surprising that you do not overfit on these images. So no matter how large the parameterization of your model is, you still do not suffer from overfitting. And so there has to be something really special about the kind of problems that you are solving that allows you to fit without ever overfitting. Right? So we would like to characterize what this simplicity is. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it later. But for now, let us say that we are trying to understand what makes problems in typical problems in deep learning easy. On the technical side, we use ideas from statistical physics and something called as information geometry, which is a combination of geometry and information theory. And so these are tools to understand how probability distributions look like. Most of us know a probability distribution as a function. A function is a very large object. It has infinite dimensions. It can change in many, many ways across the domain. We have developed ways to visualize these functions that are a little fancy. So we can say exactly how the network trains or where it goes and how different two networks are on different images, stuff like this. Okay. So personally, I am also very interested in other kinds of learning. Artificial learning is a little boring because there is all this structure in the physical world, and artificial learning is simply about mimicking that structure. We invented words, then the neural network learns the meaning of those words, and we feel happy. We created images, the neural network learns to identify cats in the images, but we can also do that since the age of 3, I guess. So there is something that there have to be some common themes about how biological organisms learn or evolve, and how artificial networks learn and do well. What I'm interested in understanding is these principles. And we are just beginning thinking in this direction. So these are some projects with Vijay Balasubramaniam is a physics professor. He works on theoretical physics. Josh Gold is a professor in neuroscience. He does experiments with monkeys. Sometimes he also does experiments with human beings. So the boundary is a little blurred between monkeys and humans. With these experiments, let me give you one example. Okay. So look at this cartoon here. And so there is Alice at the bottom, Bob at the top. Both are in charge of sweeping the floor. Okay. And what I am trying to show you here is that these flower pots are hanging from the ceiling. And so let's say there is 5 flower pots hanging from the ceiling, and these horizontal lines are the lines where the flower pots are hanging. Now, the 2 lines have 2 different colored flowers. Let's say one of the, or they have the same colored flowers. Okay, so both of them are, let's say, red flowers. So Monday morning, one of the flower pots sheds its flowers, and the flowers fall on the ground. And Alice says that I will only clean the flowers that fell from the line at the bottom. Bob says, I will only clean the flowers that fell from the line at the top. And they would now like to decide which flower pot shed these flowers, whether it came from the top or it came from the bottom. This is a very cartoon task, but it is one way of understanding how humans make decisions when given access to very, very, very small amount of samples. So if I give you these particular flowers, it's not that easy to say which flower bed the flowers came from, right? So when you show these pictures to human beings on a computer, so there is something called as Amazon Mechanical Turk, where there are people who will go to the computer and they will you can pay them like 50 cents for guessing which flower pot the flowers came from, and then you get one data point about how a particular human decides between these 2 options. So we are trying to find in this project, we're trying to find how people think of simplicity. A longer line is more complicated than a smaller line. A smaller line is more complicated than a dot. A curved line is more complicated than a longer line. And so we give them different kinds of options, and then we make them choose. And then we study like what principles they use to decide between simplicity and complicated models. And this also somehow seems uh, identical to how neural networks do inference. So humans make decisions in a certain way. Neural networks seem to do the same kind of decision making. And this seems interesting because this suggests that there is some common themes as to how these 2 things are learning. Okay. The second kind of things that I worked on is most of you may have seen stuff like this, right? So you have Google Translate. Google Translate takes sentences written in Chinese, let's say, and translates them to English. It can also take sentences in Chinese and translate them to Spanish. There are many, many pairs of languages. New languages keep getting discovered every once in a while. And it's so for instance, what Google does when it gives us these results is that it has one model which was trained for, let's say, English to French. And it can take this model and adapt this model to translate between English and something that looks like French, let's say Italian. So it can take this model, do some small changes to this model, and modify it to translate between English and Italian. And they can do this because French and Italian turns out they're not that different from each other as to how the structure is. But let's say French and Hindi might be very far away. So to translate between English and Hindi, they would need to do some other language, let's say Persian. Okay. So there are themes between tasks. Each task translating between English and French and translating between English and Italian. These are two different learning problems. There has to be some common shared structure between the two problems that allows you to take one model, train on one task, and adapt it to another. Okay. So this is how Google Translate was built, for instance. But obviously, taking a bunch of RGB images of cats and dogs and planes and boats, and then trying to adapt this model to images of MRIs or CT scans or some other thing is not a good idea, right? Because these two images are quite different from each other. So we would like to understand which learning tasks are similar and which learning tasks are different from each other, so that we can do a better job of doing such adaptation. Why do you want to do the adaptation? Well, Swahili is a very rare language. There are very few speakers of Swahili. So you don't want to go around and keep collecting data of all new things that you want to do. It would be very nice if you could take existing tasks and adapt them to new tasks every time you discover a new task that you want to do. Okay, so this is something called as transfer learning. And in general, the question that we would like to ask is, I give you some data in machine learning. What is the best way to learn from this data? We know a way to learn from data, train a neural network, but what is the best way to learn from data? How much information does one image really convey about a cat? Yeah. And so we do some algorithmic work around these directions. There are also some applications that I'm working on with the medical school around this. One funny thing is when you think about it, machine learning is really about taking a bunch of data and then finding all the common stuff in the data, the salient stuff, the most prominent things, and then using it to make predictions. Cats are cats because they look in a particular way. An Egyptian cat is difficult to classify because it looks a little bit like a dog, right? So machine learning doesn't quite work if there is no salient structure. In medicine, there is really no salient structure. So there is only like every patient is quite different. Their genetic makeup is quite different. Some of them have been smoking since the age of 15, so their lungs are very different from the ones who haven't been smoking. Your race and your demographics might be different. Turns out if you don't study too much, then you have higher likelihood of Alzheimer's. So that is one reason why you should all be here. What I want to convey is that there is machine learning is fundamentally imposed on such kinds of data because there is no shared structure. But obviously, we would like to do something and cut across this weird unshared stuff to still make decent predictions. So this is really the battle between the two fields. You would like to do learning to find the salient stuff, but salient stuff ain't good enough. We have to go and find the non-salient stuff also when you make. Yeah. So when I was your age, which was roughly 10, 12 years ago, all I really wanted to do was build robots. So I spent a lot of time building robots, spent a lot of time building autonomous cars in particular. And one thing that I worked on was, you know that you and I, when we drive in the city, we have to conform to some rules. When you go and give the driving test, you convince the guy who gives you the certificate that you know the rule book and you can drive according to it, and then you get a check, right? Of course, next day you go to drive, there is one car which is too slow in front of you. You just go around the car and then make your way to wherever you're going. So you keep breaking rules all the time when you drive. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to go anywhere in time. If you are stuck in traffic, you have to break the rule. You do crazy stuff like cut across cars, cut across solid yellow lines, etc. And it's just really an important thing for robots to learn, because otherwise they would never be able to drive well. It is important to understand how do I break rules safely, which rules should I break, which rules should I not break. And these are the kind of things that we did in the world of bio. These days, I'm a little more interested not in cities, which are very structured. Cities are kind of a little boring because the buildings all look the same. There is nothing new to learn there in terms of the shape of buildings. Forests are a little more messy. Every part of the forest looks very different. There's all kinds of things in there. So we have a project where we are trying to do basically mapping of large scale areas in forests. And by mapping, I mean stuff like this. So forestry people tell me that the if you ask a forestry scientist, there are forestry scientists, how many trees there are in this part of a forest, they will give you the number, up to plus minus 5. But basically, the shrubbery around the forest, the small trees and the other kinds of biodiversity, it is essentially invisible to the scientists because they never bother to measure it yet. Measuring trees in forestry happens when one person, like he goes and takes a laser sensor and then walks around the forest and then like measures the height of a tree using the sensor, or like there is something called as a breast height diameter. They literally go and hold the tree and look at the diameter. So there are all these slightly more old-fashioned ways of measuring stuff that they use to understand how the forest is evolving. But a lot of the forest is unstudied in the sense that what lies in the floor, how fast things are growing across at lower heights, etc. And so we would like to do these kinds of things, understand how much biomass there is, how much carbon there is captured. And so we do it with teams of drones that go and map these regions. With Anishe, who was here, we are doing some more of these ideas in oceans, where there is even little structure. Forests have messy structure, cities have too much structure, oceans have no structure. So it is much harder to do any kind of robotics, even in the river next to them. This is a cute project, the last one that we just started. It is about understanding how two teams of multiple agents fight with each other. So when you see soccer or football, where I come from, 11 people fight against 11 other people, and there are strategies as to how they fight with each other. There are plays that they execute to win over one another. Turns out your immune system is executing these things on a daily basis. So to give you some numbers, there are about 10 raised to 15 different viruses that your body is fighting on a daily basis. And to help you in this fight, your body develops something called as T cells. T cells are stuff that is created by the body when a virus comes and attacks it. So it identifies the virus, and then you develop T cells that are designed to target these viruses. The body, in principle, can create up to 10 raised to 45 different kinds of T cells, which is an enormous number. So to give you an estimate of how large this number is, this is the square root of the number of atoms in the known universe. It is really huge. And obviously, your body does not want to waste all its energy to create each one of these different defenses. It would like a defense for HIV, because if you get HIV, you die. It would also like a defense for common cold, even if you don't die when you get common cold. And it has to dedicate how much energy it spends to developing each kind of defense. And so you can study some principles about how the immune system is organized and use these principles for these problems in robotics. And we see that you get very nice results in the sense that you can have 1,000 agents fighting against 1,000 other agents. One of them evolves strategies and the other one tracks these evolving strategies. Simple things, but we get very general principles of how this game evolves. Just as a, I guess, to conclude, I wanted to show this project that Siminghe did this summer. He's finishing his second year in the undergraduate program. This was on active exploration, where he put a RGB camera on a drone that he built himself. And then the idea is to kind of go around in his room, in this case, and then find new things that you haven't seen yet. So he uses the uncertainty of the known map that he is building, and then goes and then rotates in his case and moves around a little bit in his case to reduce the uncertainty of the voxels that he has not seen yet properly. Uh, how many of you know nerve? Just as a matter, 2, 5, 6. So nerves are like these things called neural radiance fields. They are a very upcoming and exciting thing where you do play the following game. So let us say I have this land mover, excavator. Yes, this is called an excavator. An excavator in a volume, and I give you a few images of this object from around it. Using these images, you get a pretty good idea of what the 3D shape of the excavator looks like, right? Nerve is simply an algorithm to find the shape. Find the shape in a very photorealistic way because you can know what exactly the color of the excavator is at every particular point in its 3D volume. And these are some fancy methods that came out in the last couple of years to do this. What we were doing, what we were interested in doing is taking one image, obviously to understand 3D structure, you need multiple images. But using one image in a data set, you can kind of hack your way in a little bit towards 3D knowledge. After all, I am standing here, I have one image of all of you. I can still guess each of your height pretty fine, right? I may be off in many cases, but I'll be roughly correct. So I know some understanding of the 3D world, even with one single image, because I've seen many, many other images in my past, just like the. So we take images like this, a few cars, and then we can know what is behind the car without ever seeing it, because we have seen many, many other cars in the data set. So using a nerve. This is a very preliminary result of this project where we wanted to see, I know one image of this object from one vantage point. What is the next best vantage point that I should go to find more information about this object? Okay, this is something called as active exploration. This was begun by her back in the 70s. To conclude, I work on reinforcement learning with Amazon. And you are all roboticists, people interested in robotics at least. We are doing reinforcement learning for slightly different kinds of problems. For instance, let me try to explain it in this way. If you go to a coffee shop, there is a Starbucks very close to us. Coffee shop makes about 500 cups of coffee per day. You can estimate this after you go back. If you want 1 million samples from the coffee machine, it will take a lot of time for this coffee shop. It had to run for about 10 years without breaking down before it gives you 1 million samples. The current methods for reinforcement learning need lots and lots of samples to do anything. So you have a robot manipulator that is trying to pick a mug. Imagine that it has to pick a mug successfully 1 million times without ever breaking down before you can pick up the mug properly, or at least meaningfully properly. This is to say that reinforcement learning for problems in robotics is very challenging because the robots keep breaking all the time, and reinforcement learning requires a lot of data from these systems. But there are some other systems like the cloud, for instance. There are lots and lots of computers on the cloud. Half of them are broken at any given point of time to begin with. You don't even notice it. So these systems have a lot more redundancy. There's a lot less at stake here. You don't kill anyone if something breaks down. If one of your jobs did not upload properly, or your photo wasn't tagged correctly in Facebook, nothing bad happens. You just get a tiny bit upset, right? There are a lot of systems where there is much less at stake, and you can get lots and lots of data without much grief. And these are the systems that you can optimize with slightly more inefficient methods like reinforcement learning, and that's kind of what we're. So to conclude, I will tell you what I teach. I teach a deep learning course in fall. This is a graduate level course on deep learning. And I teach this course for learning in robotics in spring. This course will do filtering, SLAM, which is about how to map environments, and some reinforcement learning. So we should stop here. And if you have a couple of questions, I'll take them now. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. On slide 3, you mentioned that you're working on, I mean, the book is working on finding something in very unstructured data sets.
Mhm.
So, what are the methods you use? What learning methods you use? Are they unsupervised methods? What structures you are hoping to find from there?
Uh, so we primarily use methods from information theory and some learning theory. Uh, the there is a lot of common shared things inside these methods. So yes, we do some unsupervised learning, we do some semi-supervised learning, but these are algorithms to reduce the amount of data that you need to learn or to help you identify, let us say, one particular small part of the data set, make your predictions better on one particular small part of the data set. Uh, there are many different algorithms to do this, but they all come from the same kind of ideas, which is to reduce the amount of data. So we develop principles for understanding this. We have developed algorithms for doing this. But the main tools that we use really come from physics and information theory. Any other questions? Yeah.
I noticed in the slide that you had like different rotating cars.
Mhm.
I was expecting that the front of the car, for example, if the perspective was taken from behind the car would be blurry. But I was wondering like, why would the back of the car not be perfectly clear or something like that?
Yes, so there is a lot of extra structure that goes in. So one of the car's backside is used to fill in the backside of this car that you do not see.
Okay.
This is really the reason. You should, in principle, it should be blurry because I would not know if the car is missing the backside if you if you have given only one image. But here there is a little bit of a data set that helps you do this. Mhm.
So instead of doing that.
Yes, this is very clever. So nerve by itself wouldn't work on this. What we do is use an object detector and pull out all the objects in the image and then run nerve on each of them individually. If there are no more questions, yes.
Can you use some of your ideas of reinforcement to grow, grows? I accepted that, for example, you have when you put those two things together, those includes, for example, plants. You need water and energy. And grows. So some of your ideas might be applicable to that.
They may be. So reinforcement learning is really the most inefficient way to explore because it fundamentally does not know, does not understand any structure of the world. And you can always put in more structure into these methods, and that makes them a little more efficient. But the way you do the concept of reinforcement is very naive in how it explores. What I find much more interesting is adaptation, where I see an environment that is a tiny bit different from my current environment, and that allows me to change in a way that could be called as growth. It is not growth in the sense of a plant growing or a cell splitting, but it is a growth in the sense of you learning a slightly different environment. It is much more narrowly defined and potentially something that we can understand instead of going all the way to reinforcement learning where I'm really like flying blind and then trying to pick up a mug by just trial and error. So we are doing some work on understanding how small parts of the physiology of the retina. So for instance, you have all of you have two eyes. Each eye sends your brain about 10 Mbps of information. This is more than your download speed of the Wi-Fi in this room. So 20 Mbps of information goes to your brain, and there is about 80 different types of neurons, not 80 neurons, 80 different types of neurons inside the eye that process this information. And really, like, there is no reason for biology to be so silly, so stupidly inefficient. But it is not inefficient in the sense that each of these neurons do slightly different things because they have evolved to adapt to a slightly changing world. So you have, let us imagine the eye as it evolved across millennia. You have 50 neurons, and then sometime you started showing a slightly different environment, and your biology realized it needs a 51st neuron to try to learn slightly different kind of features. And now it is sitting there inside your eye, even if you no longer go hunting in the forest for food, right? So this redundancy that you see in biology is an artifact of growth. It is also allowing you to do certain things more efficiently. And we are bringing up, I should say, not doing yet, some kind of theory of how such systems evolve. And that is a very narrow way of looking at growth, but it seems achievable.
Yeah, so I have a follow-up question on your comments on the sample, like inefficiency of reinforcement learning. So some machine learning scientists would argue that the challenge to reinforcement learning is actually on the central real gap. Because in simulation, if you have enough computational power, you can simulate millions of years of evolution to reach something. So and in the simulation, the data we have is enormous. So we wouldn't have that problem as our computational power gets more and more. So how would you comment on that?
Controversial answer, perhaps. So if you can build a simulator, then you can also write a controller for your robot. So if you have a robot, you build it inside a simulator, you should be able to write a controller for it. It doesn't make it's a little boring to do reinforcement learning in the simulator. Now it is interesting to do the reinforcement in the simulator and try to run it on the real platform. But if it works, it is not it is we should call ourselves lucky if it works, right? There is no reason it should work. So if you built an algorithm in the simulator and then when you ran it on the real platform, nothing broke, you should be saying instead of saying correct. It's we obviously know that the physical world is very complicated. So it will work, this real business will work for problems that do not suffer from this complexity or not need this complexity. You ask one of the walking people here, they do not, they cannot train the simulator and make things work on the real platform. So if you are tackling problems that are genuinely simple, that allow you to do the simulator, glory to you, but most problems will not be that.